Hello, and welcome to TalkieTime. I am your host, Marcus Smith, and today I have the pleasure of interviewing Tony Wan. So thank you very much, Tony, for letting me interview you.
Oh, a pleasure. Yeah, always happy to help, Marcus.
So, Tony, to get the conversation kind of started, you mentioned that you have been collecting or putting together advice for your son. So if you could tell me a little bit about how did you get started with that, and maybe what's the first piece of advice?
Yeah, I mean how it got started was just supernatural. Not sorry, naturally. That
You're
sounded
gonna
really
tell me
weird. I was
you're gonna
like,
tell me a miracle happened?
yeah. No, 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 no. It literally just being a parent
Yeah.
and as my son sort of grew in his abilities to have conversations with me, um as a parent, one of the joys is you just naturally begin teaching your child how to navigate the world, how to do things, very simple things, how to prevent mistakes, how to prevent harm to themselves, etc. And uh, I didn't, I wasn't as thoughtful as to prepare beforehand, like a collection of things. So this all really just came out of being a dad and having these new experiences for myself where I wanted to communicate and pass on very simple but helpful information to my son. And so it began with little things like some of the lessons emerged from teaching him math in the mornings before he goes to school, because there's some very simple logic rules that I think make math beautiful and can actually be abstracted and transported to be helpful for other parts of your life. There's things that came out of his violin playing. He plays a violin, he chose the instrument himself, and there's just a lot of lessons that came out of the challenges that naturally arise when a young person is trying to improve a skill for themselves
Yeah.
to pursue something with excellence even at a young age. And sometimes I think we sort of diminish uh, how how many things children are capable of in terms of what we might think of as a more sophisticated set of ideas is actually, in my experience, there from a very early age, and the concepts are simple
Mhm.
and powerful and helpful for them,
Mhm.
um, according to his own. Like I once in a while I'll ask him, "What's the most useful piece of advice I've given you over the past week or year or something like that?" We just have conversations about it. So
Mhm. How old is your son right now, Tony?
he is a little over 10 and a half. He'll be 11 in May this year.
Mhm. My background is developmental, like child psychology, and you mentioned
Awesome.
sometimes we diminish what children kind of can do, and it's really interesting because for a long time in Western society, it was like children are, they're children. You should not believe them or hear them out or anything like that. And
That's terrible.
oh, it's horrible. It's horrible. And it's only been in the last I'm not remembering an exact date, so I'm kind of making this up, but it's only been in the last like 20 or 30 years that a psychologist came around and said, "Hey, by the way, like you should believe children when they say something. They're not lying to you. Like they're speaking from their own experiences." And so it's like it's interesting because there is historically this tendency to kind of diminish children's capabilities or assume they know nothing.
Well, yeah, for me, I think it's like probably part of cope for parents who are very stressed out, right? It makes your life simpler if you could ignore, what's coming out of another person's mouth, whatever age they are, right? Like a lot,
Yeah.
like adults do that to each other all the time. They dismiss a person or they dismiss
Mm.
feedback. or
Yeah.
something like these days in the news is very popular, like conspiracy theory or something like that. And so it's like, well, hold on, there's something there. There's not nothing there. It's another human being. So let's at least have a fair conversation about things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned you've started to kind of collect these. What is one piece of advice that you've kind of got so far, and is there a story behind it?
Sure, yeah. My son is when he chooses something for himself, he seems to be very committed, very passionate about it. Sort of
Mhm.
just goes all the way. And so, um, but when he makes mistakes and when he has any kind of a failure,
Mhm.
he's extremely hard on himself. He's so hard on himself that it's I could see a trend towards being destructive for his life, right? And so even I saw it even when he first started. He was 5 and he used to get so frustrated. He couldn't verbalize. He couldn't even talk about it. Because I would ask him. He would just he sometimes he might yell because I taught him like you know, you got to do something with these emotions.
Mhm.
But he was so angry. And we sat down one time and we were just talking through his feelings, through his anger. And I'm like, I'm not telling you not to be angry. But why like I need to understand why you're angry. And he's just upset. He's upset that he makes mistakes. He's upset that he's not as good as he wants to be. It is all kinds of things that adults still struggle with, I think. And
Mhm.
he didn't know what to do with that emotion. And so we talked about it and I said, well, you need to take that energy that you're getting from, you know, it's good. The positive thing about what you're doing is that you're acknowledging the truth of, let's say, a lack of skill, um, or a mistake. That's a good thing, actually. And I said, look, that's a really good thing, but you can't let those bad feelings drag you down. You have to be able to take that energy and use it for something good. So if you're frustrated that you messed up this part of the song, you can just practice that part of the song much slower and just work on that part until it becomes like a muscle memory. And
Mhm.
so you know, that's what he does with it today, which is, you know, double his lifespan later. Um,
Yeah.
you know, he's kept up with it, but that's just what he does with it today. He knows he messes up. He takes a minute sometimes because he's so frustrated, but then he just gets right back to it. He's like, "What part of the song is that?" You know, if he needs help with timing, he'll turn on the metronome. But he's found more constructive ways of using that energy. So it's like you don't want to. I didn't want to stifle him. I didn't want him to dull the usefulness of the origin of those emotions, right? I didn't want to
Mhm.
deny him his emotions. You're not crazy, man. Like, yeah, it sucks to suck at something you want to be good at.
Mhm.
It's terrible because you want to be good at it. It's like
Yeah.
it's frustrating. It's so frustrating. But like how do we deal with that in a way where you maintain enough control and clarity of thought to take that energy and turn it into something good and not get so down on yourself that uh you end up making decisions that you regret later.
Mhm.
Um, you know, because like my wife had a really hard time watching this, and so she put it out there way early. Like, you can quit, you can quit. You don't have to do this because we didn't want to give him that pressure. And through tears, he just said, "No, I don't want to be a quitter. Like I want to keep like it's something I enjoy. I want to keep doing it." And so it's his own thing. Totally today, it's his own thing. He's like way beyond us,
Mhm.
and the way that he can even hear music, I'm like, wow. Like I don't. He made me take him to a classical music concert. So I was like, all right, man, this is totally your thing. Like you know, your mom and I have never done this, but like we're only doing it because of you. So I'm like, all right, man. But that's one example. Yeah.
I really love that. It's in my head, I'm sitting here like it's when you're a kid or not even a kid, like you said, adults definitely still struggle with this. But
Yeah,
it's like, what do you when you have that feeling of frustration, it's like it's helpful to know both that like the feeling of frustration is okay. It is like that is a natural and normal response, and you are not bad for being angry. You are not bad for feeling however you feel. But at the same
mhm,
time, to take that and channel that into, okay, we have this energy already. What's a productive thing that we can do with this energy? That strikes me as a very, very considerate approach to it. It does that when I was working under you, I remember
mhm.
you said something and it was the first time I had ever heard it. And I might butcher the quote, so correct me if
Don't
you
worry.
remember it.
I probably don't even remember what I said.
But you said something like perfection is like the enemy of good or something.
Yeah, perfect's the enemy of good. That's right.
And that was the first, when you said it, that was the first time I had ever heard that. And it's really interesting how, like, that's a more kind of nuanced way to understand it is like take the energy and do something with it. Whereas other people are like, I screwed up, therefore I'm going to really like lash out at the environment or myself or whatever
Yeah.
until I get it correct.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's that
You're,
part of it. And then I think where some people get stuck and it kind of bleeds into another lesson that I taught him. I I emphasized this part of it later, but I said, well, the big problem is you want to be good at violin, and you're frustrated that you're messing up on this song. And so you have this thing, this big thing, I want to be good at violin. You have a smaller thing that fits in it, which is this song that I'm practicing for recital.
Mhm.
And then you break that problem down into I'm messing up on this one small part. The rest of it's actually great, right? And so it gives you better perspective on what you actually need to work on. So you don't think I suck as a human being and I'm terrible, you know. It's literally no, it's technical. I have trouble with this one part because I don't know, something my pinky's weak or whatever it is. There's a way to get at it that is productive and focused on solutions,
I'm going to ask you
and
a bit
is
of a,
directly connected, right? So,
yeah, I'm going to ask you a bit of a curveball question, but
sure.
did that way of thinking about it come organically to you, or is that something that you also had to learn at some point in your life?
Oh, I don't think it. I mean, it came to me naturally in the way that it made sense to me over a long period of time and problem solving in different scenarios. I was never taught it. None of my parents taught me this. It wasn't something that I read in a book or anything like that. It was something that just emerged out of life and like the need to survive.
As how many good lessons come.
Yeah.
So I love that first one. What is another one that you have? And I don't know how many you have, so I'm just going to keep asking that question until I run into a wall.
Uh, I'm hoping to actually put out like a really, really short book later that covers the first 10 years of like random stuff, right? And so there'll be like one chapter will be math, one chapter will be music, right? But
Tony wants a
another
book.
one,
You heard it here first. No.
I gotta finish my other one first, man. I'm so behind. I'm trying to get my first one out later this year, but the one for my son will be a lot easier just because they're short, they're simple. It's something I repeated a million times. The second one, just as a teaser, let's take one from math. So we spend a good 45 minutes to an hour every morning just doing some math together. There's no pressure, there's no time, it's just casual, and whatever questions he has, I answer for him. And we were doing some geometry one time, and he was getting confused because of the way a lot of these problems are written. Uh, think of like fairly simple SAT geometry questions. They're done in a way to where there's a fairly obvious trick. because of the way that they've drawn the diagram, where it's easy to get confused about something. And so it's not that you don't have the intellectual capacity or that you don't know the rules that will help you solve it. All the pieces of the puzzle are there. It's just because of the way it's drawn that it's not immediately apparent.
Right.
And so I told him, the principle I gave him there was, don't get confused by the lines that other people draw for you. And you could see how that's applicable within the geometry problem itself, making it easier to find angles, etc. Or trigonometry rather. And then like but then it's also applicable if you abstract it, to other parts of your life. There will be people who build systems around you and rule sets around you. And as a person, a human being with infinite value and free will, and you have your own independence and sovereignty and should be able to look at the information that you have and to figure out a way that works for you. And so yeah, that's another one.
When you said that, it's funny because you mentioned it in the context of geometry and then abstracted. You said that, and immediately my mind went to the abstraction. I was like, oh wow. Can you think of a time where you had to apply that yourself? And I'm especially interested in outside the context of math, maybe at a job or in some other kind of function.
Yeah, absolutely. There have been many times, let's say, for example, we had the pleasure of working together at Epic doing PS and a bunch of live op stuff, and the industry that we most partner with, the corporate kind of BPO outsourcing industry, has a lot of very strong best practice culture. And so it's a lot about standardization, best practices, etc. However, I have very strong opinions on, not that those ideas are bad in and of themselves, but the way that I think about systems and information and, let's say, ecosystems, how things affect one another, there are certainly, I would say, there's a tendency to implement things blindly without context and just think that it's going to work because it worked over here, it's going to work over here. We see this in business books all the time. It's unfortunately it sells really well. So everyone, kind of confuses correlation with causation, and that causes all kinds of shenanigans. And so, you've seen me sort of in detail, systematically, like, pull systems apart and then rebuild them again. And that general way of working, being able to, yeah, okay, because one of the most common objections as I do this is, well, we've done it that way for years and there hasn't been a problem. I'm like, well, you've done it that way for years and it hasn't caused a personal problem for you is probably a more accurate statement. Because here's like a list of 10 problems it's causing. Right. That everyone else in different departments sees, but you don't see. Because of the way information flows. I'm not attributing malice to anybody. It's just the way that things are, right? And so, so I mean, that's certainly, a very common one for me.
I think the example that immediately sprung to mind is, like, I know when we first started, there was this push to, hey, we're really, I guess for the audience who doesn't know what we're talking about, player support at Epic Games. There was this need to be quick and a need to control the quality of responses, and that looked like using preset messages. But I think the thing that you kept hammering repeatedly was use your brain, use your brain, use your brain. Don't go on autopilot and just do the
Yes.
things that have been done. Think, write, make sure you're addressing. And so it's like there's the preset box of a literal canned response, but
Right.
you're talking to a human, so don't get stuck in that. Continue to think outside of that and
Yeah, exactly.
engage organically.
Yeah, because you know, we are all human beings, regardless of IQ, have a very limited ability to perceive. It's a truth about ourselves we don't like to accept. I think one of the funny things I've noticed about having a child again is we always think we know everything at every age in our life, all the way from as soon as they can talk
Yeah.
to, you know, until we get older and more experience. And now we throw data or whatever it is, or anecdotal evidence to support our stuff. But it's basically the same. And so, being able to preserve the individual's tendency to want to think very clearly and deeply understand something and to not artificially constrain their thinking is something I'm always very interested in trying to impress upon, whether it's my son or whether it's the workforce, that you have a mind that is valuable. You can see things I cannot, and I need, as I think any business leader needs that, because if you stifle it or you don't get it, and if you look at like large bureaucracies, right? Let's take governments because it's an easy target, um, and very clear that the unhealthier ones are ruled by fear, and they don't want all the information, all the relevant information. They just want a good story, whoever it is, right? That people are thinking of at the moment. What's true across all of them is that if they are suffering under dysfunction and poor leadership and immoral behavior, is that they are certainly in some shape or form telling you not to think for yourself.
Mm,
That's really unfortunate.
yeah.
I think we get a poorer world because of it, right?
Yeah. A poor world. And I feel like that question alone and that topic could go on. So many examples are jumping to mind, but I won't belabor the point.
Right.
So what is another piece of advice that you have? Last one was from math. Do we get a different genre this time?
Sure. This one is much more personal. I won't go into massive detail, but my my wife and I, like any good couple, we have disagreements. We fight. And we very early on agreed that contrary to most advice given to us, that we would occasionally have the disagreement in front of our son, especially if it wasn't that big. Like if it wasn't one of the bigger ones where you have too many things to untangle, if it was fairly simple, we would just have the discussion in front of him, and if there were opportunities to include him in problem solving, we would. And so during one of those times, children detest it. One of the things they hate the most is seeing their parents fight. Yeah, I remember they weren't my parents per se, like my mother had the occasional boyfriend, but I wouldn't like to see them fight either. Like it was, I didn't like to see my family fight. It was very dysfunctional, so that happened quite often. It was very uncomfortable as the youngest in the family. And so, he was sharing these feelings, and then we were having a conversation with him that it is much better, it's actually good to have a conflict have a constructive conflict between two people who love each other. It doesn't mean we hate each other because we make up, right? Because we make up. But it makes for a stronger, healthier relationship for us to have it out, these little things, rather than let it build up, number one. But then number two, um, to be honest and forthright with each other about what we feel is wrong. And maybe we come to a new understanding. It's not about winning or losing. Maybe we both come to a new understanding. Maybe one person modifies more than the other, but if you're really listening, you can truly work things out. And that he shouldn't see conflict as like a purely evil or bad thing. And so, that's another lesson just from human interactions and families to say that, yeah, we have fights. You're gonna have disagreements with us, especially as soon as you become a teenager. That's gonna pop out of, for us, it's gonna feel like left field, but for you, it's gonna be like, no, I'm sick of this or whatever it is. And we need you to be able to tell us to our face. And not be fearful that we will stop things here, around relationships and how to accept the reality of disagreements and conflicts, how to argue well, how to understand that in a true loving relationship, love doesn't leave, even if you have hard words for each other. Right? Love doesn't leave, it's still there. So those kinds of ideas, so that he gets comfortable with vigorous debate, maybe even a conflict, that he knows how to better handle personal ones than he has with his friends later. But yeah, like I said, it's not all conflict is bad. There's healthy ways of handling it. You really have to listen to each other, right? That kind of being
Yeah.
the primary one we taught him. It's like, no, we're listening to each other. We're not yelling over each other, right? Voices may get loud, but
I,
we weren't at the point of screaming over each other. We weren't
yeah.
talking over each other, right?
Yeah. There's so many things I love about that, and I'm going to prevent myself from going on tangents. Instead, you mentioned arguing, allowing yourself to, uh, oh, sorry, I got the pop up for Zoom.
Oh yeah, no
But
worries.
you mentioned allowing yourself to argue in front of your kid, which in my child development brain goes modeling, which is super, super amazing. And then the other thing, there's a marriage researcher who you may or may not know, John Gottman. Um, he has dedicated his life to understanding how what makes marriages work and what makes
Hmm.
marriages fail.
Hmm.
And the big kind of shocking headliner from his research is that he can accurately predict something with like 98% confidence how long a relationship is going to last based off of 5 minutes of observed conflict,
That's
which is,
crazy.
oh, you read that and
That's
you're like,
awesome.
oh, that's amazing and horrifying at the same time. But so but his one of the things that he is very emphatic about is that the biggest problem in most relationships is not that they fight.
Mhm.
The biggest problem in most relationships is that they don't fight enough.
Mhm.
And
Right.
so when you hearing that you're already thinking about this and hearing that you're already working through this, I heard you say that you're listening, which I think for many people is very hard to do because it's very easy for you to get triggered and be like, like I am under attack. They think I'm horrible, or maybe I think I'm horrible and they've confirmed it, or something like that.
Yeah, you get overly defensive or overly self-focused, right?
Do you have any kind of tips that you can share for how you listen during a conflict or what that looks like for you?
Man, yeah, this was a hard-earned lesson. because in the beginning of our marriage, my wife's a really tough lady. Something I love about her. Um, yeah, but she'll tell you to your face, like, and and
We love
um
directness.
and yeah, well, I do, and I appreciate it. And so, I think in terms of learning how to listen, one of the most important, let's say, tactics I use is I don't get to defend myself. I don't get to fire back. I don't get to protest or whatever until I can. So this is when she says I've made a mistake, whether or not I acknowledge that. Most of the time I just do outright. I'm like, okay, I did something wrong. Because there's background assumptions that I make. My wife actually loves me. We have a great relationship. She's obviously here for the long term. We have a child together. Like there's all these things that stack up, right? So I'm like, okay, I need to listen to this person. Um, but is really saying, okay, I'm not looking to fire back. A friend of mine way back in high school used to say, oh, I can't talk to that person because he's never listening. He's always just reloading his gun for the next round of shooting, right? And that stayed with me. It stayed with me all the way until now. I'll probably stay with me till my grave. So I never wanted to be that way. But then it's sitting down and saying, okay, in order to actually, if I'm interested in helping this person whom I love, whom loves me, but we're having a moment, I need to understand what the hell is wrong, what's actually wrong, not the perception or this and that. There might be misunderstanding in there, and many times there is. But in order to understand what parts are being misunderstood or where things are malfunctioning, I need to listen to her side of it as she describes it, and I need to be able to summarize it or repeat it back in a way where she accepts it, right? So she says something, maybe it's not organized. She hates organization, so maybe it's not organized. But I sit there and listen. I'm like, okay, I'm piecing stuff together. And then I'm like, okay, so let me get this right. I repeat it back to her. I'm like, is it this, this, and this? And would you accept that? As soon as she says yes, then I can say, okay, if that's the case, maybe if it's a misunderstanding, here's where the misunderstanding is. And that becomes a much easier conversation because it's not about my intentions as a person. I'm not a, cold-hearted SOB or whatever it is, right? It's much more about, because I take on, I'm the type of person to be very sensitive to my wife's negative emotions. And so I feel terrible whenever I've hurt her. And that could get it to a really dark place if I don't uh, examine it a bit and look at the mechanical parts, right? So it's like, that's not the case. Because I asked my wife, like, am I a bad person? She's like, no, 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 no. I'm not trying to say that at all, obviously. And I'm like, oh, okay, because that would be my initial interpretation. So it's literally just more of a mechanical thing. I use this kind of phrasing. This is my normal speech pattern because I've lived mostly with dudes my age for most of my adult life. And now I'm married to this wonderful woman who's decided to take me in. So it's different. She's like, don't treat me like one of your friends. I'm like, okay, that's valid. I shouldn't be treating you like one of my guy friends. This was very early in our marriage. And so just learning to do that and to make sure that we have a mutual understanding of what happened or where the problem is. Because if you have different if you're dealing with different facts, right? Like you can't have a meaningful conversation about what is the solution that would be agreeable for both of us. Um, if you can't find that common ground in the very beginning. And so I would say, yeah, that those things really, really help me to listen and to remember too that, I love this other person. And we had conversations surrounding this. It's like if I once said, again, very early, if we acknowledge that we really deeply love each other, let's make sure that we restrain ourselves in terms of overly, let's say, barbed comments and certain words, right? So one of her early suggestions was, let's never use the word never. Because it's probably not true. Number one, it's probably not true, but it's
Yeah.
something we say when we're hurt, right? Oh, you never
Right.
do that. It's like, oh, well,
Right.
actually, that's not true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so, we eliminated certain words from when we argue. We gradually toned down, let's say, maybe some of our earlier and more immature emotional expressions around pain and hurt from a loved one. So we were learning too, just how to deal with that in a more mature way with each other. But we'd have conversations afterwards about it, right? Like, what didn't go well about that argument that we would prefer, right? The content was good, but some of the feelings were really off. So like, what do we do next time? We're looking at that together because
Yeah.
you're both super engaged and involved in it.
Tony, I am like completely enraptured in this conversation, but the Zoom timer is telling me that we're almost out. So I think
Oh, sure.
this is as good as place as any to wrap up. So
Cool.
I just want to say thank you for letting me interview you. I'm if I will I'm gonna steal more of your time, I can tell.
Yeah, yeah, happy to do it. Happy to have fun.
Yeah. So I'll just say thank you, Tony, and to the audience, I'll talk to you next time.